Robert Williams leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the stack of papers on his mahogany desk. As the CEO of Summit Tech Corporation, he'd seen plenty of reports over his 15 years at the helm. But these particular documents were keeping him up at night. Customer complaint forms, 23 of them in the last 2 months alone, all from the same location, the downtown branch on Fifth Avenue. He picked up the top sheet and read through it again. Waited for 3 hours, no one acknowledged me. Staff was rude. Left without getting help. The next one was similar. Receptionist ignored my request to speak with someone. Felt completely invisible. One after another, the complaints painted the same ugly picture. Long waits, dismissive behavior, customers walking out frustrated and angry. Robert had built Summit Tech from a small startup in his garage to a company with 43 branches across the state. Customer service wasn't just a department to him. It was the foundation of everything. His own grandfather had taught him that people don't remember what you sell them, they remember how you made them feel. That philosophy had guided every decision he'd made, and now it seemed like somewhere along the way that message had gotten lost. He buzzed his assistant and asked her to bring in the regional managers. 20 minutes later, 4 executives sat around his conference table, assuring him that the downtown branch was being monitored and that corrective measures were in place. They showed him charts indicating improved performance metrics and training completion certificates. Everything looked good on paper, but Robert had been in business long enough to know that sometimes the numbers lie, or at least don't tell the whole truth. That evening, Robert sat at his dinner table, barely touching the meal his wife had prepared. She noticed his distant expression and asked what was bothering him. He explained the situation, expecting sympathy or perhaps some business advice. Instead, she said something that changed everything. "When's the last time you actually visited that branch without announcing yourself first? You know they roll out the red carpet when they know you're coming. You never see what really happens." The words hit him like a slap. She was absolutely right. Every time he visited any branch, his arrival was planned weeks in advance. Staff would be on their best behavior. The office would be spotless and everything would run like clockwork. He'd shake hands, smile for photos, give an encouraging speech, and leave thinking everything was fine. But what did customers actually experience on a random Tuesday afternoon when no one important was watching? Robert made his decision right there at the dinner table. He would go undercover. Not as the CEO, not as anyone special, just as a regular person with a problem who needed help. He'd see firsthand what was really happening at that downtown branch. The next morning, Robert did something he hadn't done in years. He skipped the suit. Instead, he pulled out an old pair of jeans from the back of his closet, a simple gray polo shirt and sneakers that had seen better days. He left his expensive watch in the bedroom drawer and grabbed his old wallet instead of the leather one embossed with his initials. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Gone was the polished executive, replaced by someone who looked like he might be heading to run errands or grab groceries. His wife walked by and actually did a double take. "Wow, you look so normal," she laughed. "No one's going to recognize you." That was exactly the point. Robert grabbed the keys to his old Honda, the car he'd kept from his early days, parked in the back of their garage collecting dust, and headed out before he could second-guess himself. The drive to the downtown branch took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Robert found himself getting nervous, which seemed ridiculous. This was his company. He'd walked into boardrooms with millionaire investors without breaking a sweat. Yet somehow, the idea of sitting in a waiting room like an ordinary customer made his palms sweat. When he pulled into the parking lot at 9:30 on a Wednesday morning, he immediately noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. The parking lot had several potholes. The company sign near the entrance was faded and needed repainting. The glass doors had smudges and fingerprints all over them. Small things, maybe. But they were the first impression customers got, and first impressions mattered. Robert pushed through the doors and stepped into the waiting area. The air conditioning was running too cold, making the space feel uncomfortable. The furniture looked like it hadn't been updated since the branch opened 8 years ago. Chairs with worn fabric, scratched coffee tables with outdated magazines, and harsh fluorescent lighting that gave everything a harsh, unwelcoming glow. About 10 people were already scattered throughout the room, some looking at their phones, others staring into space with expressions of resignation. He approached the reception desk, where a young woman sat hunched over her computer. Her name tag read Jessica. She didn't look up when he approached, her fingers flying over the keyboard while she occasionally glanced at her phone sitting next to the monitor. Robert stood there for a solid 10 seconds before clearing his throat gently. Jessica's eyes flicked up briefly, and without any greeting or smile, she said in a flat voice, "Take a number from the dispenser." She pointed vaguely toward a red plastic number dispenser on the counter, and immediately returned to her screen. Robert felt a strange flutter in his chest. Was this really how customers were greeted? He took a number, 47, and glanced at the digital display on the wall showing that they were currently serving number 32. 15 people ahead of him. He found an empty chair near the window and sat down, settling in for what he suspected would be a long wait. From his seat, Robert had a clear view of the reception desk and most of the waiting area. He watched as Jessica continued typing away, occasionally laughing at something on her phone. When the door chimed and new customers entered, she rarely looked up unless they stood directly in front of her and made noise. Even then, her interactions were brief and mechanical. Take a number. Have a seat. Someone will call you. An older gentleman sitting across from Robert caught his eye and gave him a knowing look, the kind of expression that said, "Welcome to the club. We're all suffering together here." The man had been holding his number ticket so long that the paper had gone soft and wrinkled in his grip. How long had he been waiting? Robert pulled out his phone and noted the time, 9:45. He decided to document this experience properly. If he was going to make real changes, he needed real evidence, not just impressions. He opened his notes app and began typing observations, making sure to be discreet about it. As the minutes ticked by, Robert settled into his chair and watched. He'd come here expecting to find problems, but he had no idea just how bad things were about to get. This was only the beginning of a very long day, one that would change everything he thought he knew about his own company. Robert glanced at his phone. 10:30. He'd been sitting in that uncomfortable chair for 45 minutes, and they'd only moved from number 32 to number 38. At this rate, he calculated he'd be here for at least another hour and a half, probably longer. He looked around the room at the other people waiting. A middle-aged woman kept sighing loudly and checking her watch. A young guy in construction clothes had his eyes closed, clearly catching up on sleep he'd probably lost from an early morning shift. The door chimed and a well-dressed man walked in, wearing what looked like an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Robert watched with interest as the man approached Jessica's desk. This time something different happened. Jessica actually looked up. She smiled. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" The contrast was stunning. Robert sat up straighter, paying close attention now. The businessman explained that he needed to discuss some account issues with a manager. Jessica nodded, still smiling, and said, "Of course. Let me see what I can do for you." She picked up the phone, had a brief conversation, and within 3 minutes, someone came out to escort the businessman to an office. He never took a number. He never sat down. He was in and out of that waiting room in less than 5 minutes. Robert felt his jaw tighten. So that's how it worked. If you looked important, if you wore the right clothes and carried yourself a certain way, suddenly the rules didn't apply. He thought about the older gentleman across from him, still waiting patiently with his crumpled number. He thought about the construction worker trying to rest during what was probably his only break. What made that businessman's time more valuable than theirs? Another hour passed. Robert watched the digital display creep from 38 to 42. Jessica had taken at least 3 personal phone calls that he could count, each lasting several minutes. During one call, she was clearly making dinner plans with someone, laughing and twirling her hair while a customer stood at the desk trying to get her attention. When she finally hung up, she helped the customer with an attitude that suggested they'd interrupted something important. By 11:45, Robert's number still hadn't been called, but something else caught his attention. A woman walked in wearing designer clothes, expensive sunglasses perched on her head, and carrying shopping bags from high-end stores. She approached the desk, and once again Jessica transformed. Suddenly there was warmth, attention, professionalism. The woman explained she needed help with something, and Jessica said, "Absolutely. Let me get someone for you right away." Robert couldn't believe what he was seeing. The woman had just walked in. No number, no waiting, and Jessica was already on the phone pulling strings. Sure enough, within minutes, someone emerged to help her. The woman swept past the waiting area without a second glance at the people who'd been sitting there for hours. The construction worker had clearly had enough. He stood up, crumpled his number in his fist, and tossed it in the trash on his way out. "Unbelievable," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Robert wanted to stop him, to apologize, to explain that this wasn't how things were supposed to be. But he couldn't blow his cover, not yet. He needed to see how deep this problem went. At noon, Jessica stood up and put a small sign on her desk. Back in 30 minutes. She didn't announce it to the room. She didn't ask anyone to cover the desk. She just left. The digital display stayed frozen at number 42. Robert's number was 47, 5 people ahead of him, but now there was no one to call numbers at all. The waiting room grew more crowded during Jessica's lunch break. People came in, took numbers, found seats, or stood against the walls when chairs ran out. The older gentleman who'd been there since before Robert arrived stood up slowly, using the arm of the chair for support. He walked to the trash can and threw away his ticket. Robert watched him shuffle toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. That image burned into Robert's mind. This was someone's grandfather, someone's father, and his company had just wasted hours of his day and sent him away with nothing. When Jessica returned at 12:35, 5 minutes late from her 30-minute break, she had a coffee in one hand and was texting with the other. She sat down, took a long sip of her drink, checked her phone again, and only then did she glance at the screen to see what number they were on. Without any urgency, she pressed the button. Number 43. Robert felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He'd built this company on the principle of respecting people, of treating everyone with dignity regardless of who they were or what they looked like. And here, in one of his own branches, that principle was being trampled on every single day. How many customers had given up and left? How many had taken their business elsewhere? How much damage had been done to the reputation he'd spent 15 years building? Another 45 minutes crawled by. Jessica called numbers 44 and 45, but then something strange happened. A young professional woman walked in, speaking loudly on her phone about some business deal. She approached the desk, still on her call, and held up one finger to Jessica as if to say 1 minute. Jessica waited patiently, smiling, while this woman finished her call. When she hung up, Jessica asked how she could help. The woman needed to speak with someone about her account. Jessica didn't even mention the number system. She just picked up the phone and arranged for someone to see her right away. The woman was escorted to the back within minutes. Robert looked at the display, still showing 45. His number was 47. He was next, or should have been, but Jessica had just let someone cut the entire line. He stood up and walked to the desk, keeping his voice calm and even. "Excuse me, I've been waiting for over 3 hours now. My number is 47. Can you tell me how much longer it might be?" Jessica looked at him with barely concealed irritation. She glanced at his number, then at her screen, and shrugged. "Sir, there are people ahead of you. You'll be called when it's your turn." "But that woman who just went in didn't take a number," Robert said, still keeping his tone respectful. "She just walked in." Jessica's expression hardened. That was a priority client with an urgent matter. "Look, everyone thinks their situation is special. You just need to wait like everyone else." She turned back to her computer screen, clearly dismissing him. Robert stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. A priority client. Based on what? The clothes she wore? The confident way she carried herself? He returned to his seat, pulled out his phone, and added to his growing list of observations. Discriminatory service. Unprofessional behavior. Complete disregard for basic fairness. At 2:15 in the afternoon, nearly 5 hours after he'd arrived, Jessica finally called number 46. Just one more person ahead of him. Robert waited, watching as a tired-looking woman approached the desk and was directed to a service window. She'd been sitting near him, had arrived about an hour after he did, and looked relieved to finally be called. Then the front door opened again. A man in an expensive suit walked in, and Robert knew exactly what was about to happen. Sure enough, Jessica's face lit up with recognition. "Mr. Patterson, so good to see you again." The man smiled and approached the desk, and they chatted like old friends. Within minutes, someone came to escort Mr. Patterson to an office. Robert felt something shift inside him. He'd seen enough. More than enough. But he wanted to see one more thing. He wanted to see what would happen when his number was finally called. Would Jessica treat him with the same dismissiveness? Would she try to rush him through? He needed to know just how bad the experience was from start to finish. The clock ticked past 2:30. Robert's phone buzzed with messages from his office, but he ignored them. Nothing was more important than this. Nothing mattered more than understanding what his customers were really going through. And when his number was finally called, he knew exactly what he was going to do. At 2:45, the digital display finally changed to 47. Robert's number. He'd been sitting in that waiting room for over 5 hours. 5 hours. He stood up, feeling his knees protest from sitting so long in those uncomfortable chairs, and walked to the desk for what felt like the 100th time. Jessica looked up with the same blank expression she'd given him all day. "Number 47?" she said in a monotone voice, as if she hadn't seen him approach the desk multiple times already. "Yes, that's me," Robert said, handing her the worn ticket. "What do you need?" Jessica asked, her fingers already hovering over her keyboard, clearly ready to type up whatever quick answer she could give him to move him along. Robert took a breath. "I need to speak with the branch manager. I have some serious concerns that need to be addressed at a management level." Jessica's expression shifted from bored to annoyed in an instant. "The manager is busy with important clients. You can leave your name and number and someone will get back to you within 3 to 5 business days." "I've been waiting for over 5 hours," Robert said calmly. "I really need to speak with someone today. It's quite urgent." Jessica let out an audible sigh, the kind that made it clear she thought he was wasting her time. "Sir, like I said, the manager is busy. Everyone thinks their problem is urgent. That's what the callback system is for." She pushed a form across the desk toward him. "Fill this out and we'll contact you." Robert looked at the form, then back at Jessica. "Is there any way I could just speak with the manager for a few minutes? I don't mind waiting a bit longer if she's with someone right now." "He," Jessica corrected sharply. "The manager is a he, and no, you can't just demand to see the manager whenever you want. We have procedures here." She tapped the form with her pen. "Fill this out or don't, but I have other customers waiting." Robert glanced behind him. The waiting room had cleared out somewhat. There were maybe 6 people left, and the display showed they were caught up to current numbers. Jessica wasn't busy at all. She just didn't want to be bothered with his request. Before Robert could respond, a door opened from the back offices, and a man in his late 40s emerged, laughing loudly at something. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his company badge hanging from his neck. The badge read Branch Manager. The man was walking a client toward the exit, an older gentleman in expensive golf attire. And they were chatting like old friends. "Jerry, you have to join us next Saturday," the manager was saying. "We'll get that rematch on the back 9. "I still say your ball went out of bounds," Jerry laughed. "We'll let the course settle it. Thanks again for handling that so quickly, Tom. You always take care of me." "Anytime, Jerry, that's what we're here for." Robert watched this exchange with growing disbelief. The manager, Tom apparently, had just spent who knows how long with a golf buddy while customers sat in the waiting room for hours. As Jerry left through the front door, Tom started to head back to his office. Robert saw his opportunity. "Excuse me," Robert called out, taking a few steps toward him. "Tom, I was hoping I could have a moment of your time." Tom stopped and turned, looking at Robert with a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. His eyes took in Robert's casual clothes, the worn jeans, the simple polo shirt. Robert could practically see the calculation happening in Tom's mind. "Not important, not worth my time." "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Tom asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really care about the answer. "No, we haven't met," Robert said, walking closer. "I've been waiting in your lobby for over 5 hours, and I really need to discuss some concerns with you about this branch." Tom's expression shifted to one of barely concealed annoyance. He glanced at Jessica, who immediately jumped in. "Mr. Harrison, this gentleman has been insisting on seeing you all day. I explained our callback procedure, but he won't fill out the form." Tom nodded as if this confirmed everything he needed to know. "Sir, my receptionist has already explained our process. We can't have walk-ins disrupting our schedule. If you have concerns, you need to fill out the proper paperwork, and we'll address them through the appropriate channels." "I'm not a walk-in," Robert said, keeping his voice level despite the frustration building inside him. "I took a number. I waited my turn. I've been more than patient. I simply need 10 minutes of your time to discuss some serious issues I've observed today. Tom crossed his arms. Issues you've observed? Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but I run this branch according to company standards. If you have a complaint, there's a process for that. Now I have actual clients to attend to, so if you'll excuse me. Actual clients? Robert interrupted, his composure starting to crack. What does that make me? What about all the people who've been sitting in this waiting room all day? Jessica stood up from her desk. Sir, you need to lower your voice. Mr. Harrison has been more than patient with you. But you're being disruptive now. Robert looked at her, then at Tom, and felt a wave of anger mixed with disappointment wash over him. This was his company. He'd built it from nothing. He'd written the mission statement himself, emphasizing respect, dignity, and equal treatment for every single person who walked through their doors. And here were his employees in his branch, treating regular customers like they were invisible while rolling out the red carpet for anyone who looked wealthy or important. Tom pulled out his phone and glanced at it, making a show of how busy and important he was. Look, I don't have time for this. Jessica, if this gentleman continues to be disruptive, we may need to call security. Security. Robert almost laughed. They were threatening to call security on their own CEO because he dared to ask for fair treatment while dressed in ordinary clothes. The irony was almost too much. But Robert wasn't ready to reveal himself yet. He wanted to see how far this would go. He wanted Tom and Jessica to show him exactly who they were when they thought no one important was watching. Because that was the truth of a person's character, how they treated people they thought couldn't help or hurt them. I'm not being disruptive, Robert said quietly. I'm a customer who's been waiting for over 5 hours, who's watched you let multiple people skip the line based on how they looked, who's witnessed your receptionist spend more time on her phone than helping people, and who just wants 10 minutes to discuss these issues with someone in charge. That's all I'm asking for. Tom's face flushed red. Are you accusing my staff of something? Because I can assure you, this is one of our top-performing branches. We have metrics, we have standards, and we meet them consistently. What we don't have time for is troublemakers who come in making accusations. I'm not making accusations, Robert said. I'm stating facts about what I've witnessed firsthand. You know what? Tom said, his voice rising. I think we're done here. You've made it clear you're not interested in following proper procedures. Jessica, note in the system that this individual is not to be accommodated at this branch. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Robert stood there stunned. They were banning him from his own branch. For asking to be heard, for expecting basic respect after waiting 5 hours. This was so much worse than he'd imagined. The complaints he'd received had just been the tip of the iceberg. Around the waiting room, the remaining customers had stopped what they were doing and were watching this confrontation unfold. Robert could see the recognition in their eyes. They'd all experienced similar treatment, they'd all felt the same frustration, and now they were watching someone finally stand up and say something about it. A young man in his 20s who'd been sitting near the window stood up and spoke. He's right, you know. I've been here for 3 hours and I watched you let at least 5 people skip the entire line just because they looked rich. That's not fair. Tom spun to face him. Excuse me? Were you asked for your input? No, but I'm giving it anyway, the young man said, his voice shaking slightly but determined. This whole place is a joke. You treat people like garbage if they're not wearing designer clothes. Another voice joined in. A woman in scrubs who looked like she'd come from a hospital shift. I've been here for 2 hours on my lunch break. I have to go back to work in 20 minutes and I still haven't been helped because that receptionist keeps taking personal calls. Tom's face went from red to purple. Everyone needs to calm down right now. If you have complaints, there are proper channels. The proper channels clearly don't work, Robert said. Otherwise, you wouldn't treat customers this way. Tom pulled out his phone. That's it. I'm calling security. All of you need to leave right now or I'll have you escorted out. Robert smiled. It was time. He'd seen everything he needed to see. Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Tom was already dialing on his phone, probably calling building security. Jessica stood behind her desk with her arms crossed, looking satisfied that this troublemaker was finally going to be removed. The other customers who'd spoken up were watching nervously, probably wondering if they'd made a mistake getting involved. Before you make that call, Robert said calmly, you might want to look at this. He pulled out his company ID card, the one with his photo and the title Chief Executive Officer, printed clearly beneath his name. He held it up so both Tom and Jessica could see it. The change that came over their faces was instant and almost comical. Tom's finger froze over his phone screen. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. The color drained from Jessica's face so quickly that Robert actually worried she might faint. She gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles turning white. "Mr. Williams," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. The phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. He didn't even bend down to pick it up. I don't... We weren't... Nobody told us you were coming. That was the entire point, Tom," Robert said quietly. The anger in his voice was controlled now, cold and precise. "I needed to see what really happens here when you think nobody important is watching. And I have to say, it's been quite an education." Jessica made a small sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Mr. Williams, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I would never have... If I'd known it was you..." "Stop," Robert cut her off. "That's exactly the problem, Jessica. You wouldn't have treated me this way if you'd known who I was. But here's the thing. Every single person who walks through that door deserves the same respect you'd give me. Every single one of them is the reason we have jobs, the reason this company exists." Tom seemed to find his voice, though it was shaky. "Sir, please let me explain. We have protocols, we have systems in place. This branch has excellent performance metrics. We're actually one of the top performing?" Robert's voice rose slightly.
"Tom, I've been sitting in this waiting room for over 5 hours.
I watched an elderly man give up and leave after waiting even longer. I saw a construction worker walk out because he couldn't waste any more of his day. I witnessed you and Jessica give preferential treatment to at least 7 people who jumped the line simply because they looked wealthy or important." Tom opened his mouth to protest, but Robert held up his hand. "I'm not finished. I watched Jessica spend more time on personal phone calls than helping customers. I saw her scroll through social media while people waited, and when I finally got called after 5 hours and asked to speak with you, I was dismissed, threatened, and nearly banned from my own company's branch. Do you understand how serious this is?" The waiting room had gone completely silent. The customers who remained were watching with wide eyes, some with their phones out, probably recording this entire exchange. The young man who'd spoken up earlier had a slight smile on his face, clearly enjoying seeing justice being served. Tom's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he steadied himself against the wall. "Mr. Williams, please, I can explain everything. We have targets to meet, quotas to hit, and sometimes we have to prioritize certain clients to maintain relationships. It's just business, it's just business," Robert repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Let me tell you what business is, Tom. Business is treating every customer with dignity. Business is honoring the trust people place in us when they choose our company. Business is not making someone's grandmother sit in a chair for 4 hours while you chat about golf with your buddies." He turned to address the remaining customers in the waiting room. "I want to personally apologize to each and every one of you for what you've experienced here today. This is not what Summit Tech stands for. This is not the company I built. And I promise you, this ends today." The woman in scrubs who'd spoken up earlier raised her hand tentatively. "Does this mean we'll actually get help now? Because I really do need to get back to work." Robert smiled at her, a real smile. "Absolutely. In fact, I'm going to help you myself. What do you need?" For the next 20 minutes, Robert personally assisted each customer who'd been waiting. He pulled up accounts on Jessica's computer, made phone calls to other departments, and solved problems on the spot. Some issues required follow-up, and for those he gave out his direct office number and promised to personally ensure they were resolved. The customers left one by one, most of them still looking shocked at what they'd witnessed. When the last customer had gone, Robert turned back to Tom and Jessica. Several other staff members had emerged from the back offices, drawn by the commotion. They stood in a nervous cluster, clearly aware that something major was happening but not quite sure what. "I need everyone who works at this branch to gather in the main office area right now," Robert said. His tone left no room for argument. Within 5 minutes, the entire staff of 12 people were assembled. Some looked curious, others worried. A few clearly knew exactly what was happening based on their colleagues' pale faces. Robert stood in front of them, his casual clothes still a stark contrast to Tom's expensive suit. "My name is Robert Williams. I'm the CEO of this company, and I spent the last 5 hours sitting in your waiting room as a regular customer. What I witnessed today was completely unacceptable." He could see the wave of realization wash over the staff members who hadn't known what was happening. Several people shot worried glances at Tom and Jessica. "I'm going to be very clear about what happens next," Robert continued. "Jessica, you're suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. You'll need to gather your personal belongings and leave the premises today. You'll be contacted by HR about next steps." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Mr. Williams, I have rent to pay, I have bills. I can't lose this job. I'll do better, I promise." "You'll have the opportunity to meet with HR and state your case," Robert said, his voice not unkind but firm. "But I watched you ignore customers, take personal calls on company time, and treat people with contempt based on their appearance. Those aren't small mistakes, Jessica. Those are choices you made repeatedly." He turned to Tom. "As for you, Tom, we need to have a serious conversation about your management of this branch. The performance metrics you're so proud of, they obviously don't measure what actually matters. You'll be placed on a performance review for the next 90 days. During that time, you'll undergo intensive retraining on our company values and customer service standards. If you can't demonstrate real change, we'll have to discuss whether this is the right position for you." Tom nodded, his face ashen. "Yes, sir. I understand. It won't happen again." "You're right, it won't," Robert agreed, "because we're implementing new oversight systems. Mystery shoppers, direct customer feedback channels, and regular unannounced visits. Not just here, but at every branch." He looked around at the rest of the staff. "I saw one person today who was doing things right. His name is Kevin, and he was professional, efficient, and kind to every customer he helped. Kevin, effective immediately, you're the interim assistant manager. You'll work with Tom during his review period, and frankly, Tom, you could learn a lot from him." Kevin, a young man in his late 20s, looked stunned. "Sir, Thank you. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Robert said, "because you already understand what this company is supposed to be about." Robert pulled out his phone and made a call to his head of operations. "Linda, it's Robert. I need you to send a team to the downtown 5th Avenue branch immediately. Full audit, customer service review, and facility inspection. Also contact our security company. I want footage from all cameras in this branch for the past 3 months. Yes, today." "Thank you." He hung up and looked at the assembled staff. "Here's what's going to happen over the next few weeks. This branch is going to be completely overhauled. New furniture in the waiting area, better lighting, updated systems. But more importantly, we're going to retrain every single person here on what it means to serve customers with respect." The room was quiet, except for the sound of Jessica quietly crying as she packed her desk belongings into a box. Robert felt a pang of sympathy, but he couldn't let that override what needed to happen. Sometimes being a leader meant making hard decisions. Tom finally bent down to pick up his phone from where he'd dropped it. "Mr. Williams, I know I failed today, but I want you to know that I do care about this company. I lost sight of what was important." Robert studied him for a moment. "Then use this as a wake-up call, Tom. You have 90 days to prove you remember why we're really here. Not to impress wealthy clients or hit arbitrary numbers, but to help people, all people. That's the job." As Robert prepared to leave the branch, he looked around one more time at the waiting room where he'd spent 5 hours being ignored and dismissed. It looked different now, knowing what he knew. This wasn't just about one bad branch or 2 problem employees. This was about a company culture that had drifted away from its core values. And fixing it was going to take more than just discipline and retraining. It was going to take a complete reset of priorities from the top down. 6 months had passed since that eye-opening day at the 5th Avenue branch. Robert sat in his office looking at the reports spread across his desk and allowed himself a small smile. The numbers told an incredible story, but more importantly, the customer feedback told an even better one. The downtown branch had transformed completely. Customer satisfaction scores had jumped from a dismal 42% to 91%. Complaints had dropped by 87%. Wait times had been cut in half. But the numbers that really mattered to Robert were different. The branch had gone from losing an average of 15 customers per month to gaining 32 new ones. People were actually choosing to come back. He picked up one of the customer comment cards that his assistant had placed on his desk that morning. "I used to dread coming to this branch," it read. "Now the staff remembers my name and actually seems happy to help. Whatever changed, please keep it up." Robert set it down and picked up another. "Finally, a company that treats regular people with respect. This is how all businesses should operate." The journey to get here hadn't been easy. After that confrontational day, Robert had made the decision to visit every single one of Summit Tech's 43 branches unannounced over the following months. He'd dressed casually each time, taken a number, and waited just like any other customer. What he'd found had been sobering. The Fifth Avenue branch wasn't unique. It was just the most extreme example of a widespread problem. At about a third of the branches, he'd witnessed similar issues. Not always as blatant as what Tom and Jessica had done, but the underlying problem was the same. Staff had started measuring success by metrics that didn't matter: transaction speed, upsell percentages, VIP client retention. They'd forgotten that the real metric was whether they'd made someone's day better or worse. Robert had initiated a complete company-wide overhaul. Every branch got updated furniture and better lighting. The number system was replaced with a more efficient digital check-in process that sent text updates to customers so they could wait comfortably or run errands nearby. But the physical changes were just the beginning. The real transformation came through people. Robert had implemented a new training program that every employee, from receptionists to regional managers, had to complete. It wasn't about sales techniques or efficiency metrics. It was about empathy, about seeing each customer as someone's parent or child or friend, someone who deserved respect regardless of what they wore or how much money they had. He'd also created a mystery shopper program, but with a twist. The shoppers weren't just checking boxes on a form. They were real people from diverse backgrounds, dressed in everything from business suits to work uniforms to casual clothes. They'd rate their experiences and report back not to punish, but to identify where more support and training were needed. Perhaps the most important change was the direct feedback system. Every branch now had a simple tablet where customers could rate their experience before they left. The feedback went straight to Robert's office, unfiltered. He read through dozens of them every morning with his coffee. When someone reported a problem, his team followed up within 24 hours. Robert's phone buzzed. It was a message from Kevin, the young man he'd promoted to assistant manager at the Fifth Avenue branch. Mr. Williams wanted to share some good news. Remember Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who wrote that complaint letter 6 months ago? She came in today and specifically asked to thank you. She said this branch feels completely different now. Thought you'd want to know. Robert felt a warmth spread through his chest. Mrs. Patterson. He remembered her letter clearly. She'd been one of the customers who'd complained about being ignored for hours, while better-dressed clients got immediate service. The fact that she'd come back and noticed the change meant everything. He typed back, "That's wonderful to hear, Kevin. Please thank her for giving us another chance. How are things going with you?" Kevin's response came quickly. "Really good, sir. Tom has actually become a great mentor. I think the wake-up call changed something in him. We work well together now." That was another pleasant surprise. Robert had given Tom 90 days to prove he could change, and the man had taken it seriously. He'd gone through the retraining program, spent time working at the reception desk himself to understand what customers experienced, and completely changed his management style. He was still the branch manager, but now he led by example rather than by intimidation. As for Jessica, her story had taken a different turn. After her suspension and the subsequent investigation, she'd been let go. It had been a difficult decision, but the camera footage and customer complaints had painted a clear picture of someone who fundamentally didn't respect the role or the people she was supposed to serve. Robert had heard through the HR department that she'd found work at a different company. He hoped she'd learned from the experience, but that was no longer his concern. What did concern him was making sure the company culture never drifted that far again. Robert had started doing something new. Once a month, he picked a random branch and worked there for a full day. Not as the CEO observing from above, but actually doing the work. He'd spend hours at the reception desk, greeting customers, solving problems, and experiencing firsthand what his frontline employees dealt with every day. The first time he'd done it, the staff had been nervous and stiff, trying to be on their best behavior. But by the third or fourth time, something had shifted. They'd started treating him like part of the team, asking for his help with difficult customers, sharing jokes during slow moments. Robert had learned more about his company in those days than he'd learned from years of reports and presentations. His desk phone rang. It was his head of operations, Linda. "Robert, I just got the quarterly results from all branches. You need to see this." Overall customer retention is up 34%. New customer acquisition is up 28%. And here's the really interesting part. Employee turnover is down 41%. Robert leaned back in his chair. That last number doesn't surprise me at all. When you treat customers well, you create a better work environment for everyone. There's more, Linda continued. 7 of our employees have sent in suggestions for additional improvements. Real thoughtful ideas about how we can serve people better. That never happened before. People are actually engaged now. After hanging up with Linda, Robert walked to his office window and looked out at the city. He thought about that elderly man who'd left the Fifth Avenue branch after hours of waiting. His shoulders slumped in defeat. That image had haunted Robert for months. He'd tried to find the man to apologize personally, but had never been able to track him down. All he could do was make sure it never happened to anyone else. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Williams, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." Robert turned from the window. "Send him in." An older gentleman walked in and Robert's breath caught. It was him, the man from the waiting room. He looked better now, standing straighter, and he was smiling. "Mr. Williams," the man said, extending his hand. "My name is Frank Chen. I don't know if you remember me, but I was at your Fifth Avenue branch about 6 months ago. I waited for hours and eventually gave up and left." "I remember," Robert said, shaking his hand. "I'm so sorry about that experience. I was actually there that same day, seeing what customers went through. Watching you leave was part of what pushed me to make serious changes." Frank's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You were there? I had no idea." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper article. "I saw this story about the changes you made at Summit Tech, how you went undercover as a regular customer. My grandson showed me. I wanted to come thank you personally." "You don't need to thank me," Robert said. "I should be thanking you. You and everyone else who took the time to complain. You helped us become better." Frank smiled. "I actually came back to the branch last week. Completely different place. The young man at the desk, Kevin, he was so helpful and kind. He solved my problem in 20 minutes. That's how it should be." They talked for a while longer, and when Frank left, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in years, genuine pride in what his company had become. Not pride in the profits or the growth, though those were good. Pride in knowing that when someone walked into any Summit Tech branch, they'd be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they were. That evening, Robert drove home in his old Honda, still preferring it to the luxury car sitting in his garage. His wife asked him how his day was, and he told her about Frank's visit. "You know what the best part is?" Robert said. 6 months ago, I thought I was running a successful company because our numbers looked good. Now I know what success really means. It means Frank walked into our branch and left feeling better than when he arrived. It means that construction worker who walked out frustrated might give us another chance. It means every person who works for us understands that they're not just processing transactions. They're making someone's day better or worse." His wife smiled. "I'm proud of you. Not many leaders would have spent 5 hours in that waiting room just to understand what was really happening." Robert thought about that. "I think more of them should.